No, we're not going to get thrown out. It's public property. What's your name?
Naomi.
Richard.
Camille.
And how old are you, Gregory?
I'll be 50 in September.
9 and 8.
Older than your mother, probably.
We're going to make you 9 years old. 11-year-old. 9 years old.
9 years old.
What do you like most about your school? Using technology? You don't like much about school? Lunch and recess? Not having to work very hard to get good grades? Or seeing your friends?
Probably lunch and recess.
I like seeing my friends.
Well, we don't have to do that much work.
Recess and friends.
That's not the answer we're looking for. That is the wrong answer to that question. That would not be the right answer.
Really? Oh.
Is it the wrong answer? How so?
As a kid, you learn a lot of lessons outside of school. How to push the limits. How to face your fears. But there's one lesson you learn well before you ever step foot on a playground. You can't put a square peg into a round hole. That's what this story is really about, because it's ripping South Carolina's education system apart.
I mean, I am baffled at how this has come about, because
At the heart of this problem, buried under all the politics, is a document given to kids in grades 3 through 12 statewide, the eProve Student Engagement Survey. It's 20 questions designed to measure how much kids like going to school.
There's more to a school than student assessment results.
It's not an open-ended survey. Kids get a prompt and a set of answers to choose from. Here's question 1. When I'm in class, they can pick things like, I do enough to get good grades, I forget what time it is, or I don't try my best. Question 6 asks about rules. Question 11, what they do when they don't know something. Question 15, how they feel at the end of the day. And then there's question 17, what part of school they like the most. Technology, recess, friends. If you want to find out what your kids are thinking, there's nothing wrong with asking questions like these. They cover a lot of ground. It's a tool, a square peg, if you will. At least, South Carolina certainly saw it that way. If only South Carolina had a square hole to put it in. A few years ago, state leaders set out to make a change. They wanted to measure their schools using something other than test scores. There were a few options, and they settled on student engagement.
Children who feel a connectedness to school or feel like they belong in school tend in general to do a better job in terms of their school performance.
There were years of debates that followed.
It's not like measuring an algebra test. You know, that's pretty easy. You either got it right, you got it wrong. But when you're talking about how people feel and how to measure that, it gets to be a much more difficult area to get a hard measurement in.
The Department of Education could go about it one of two ways: create their own tool, or turn to people who had already done the work. They found a company out of Georgia, signed the contract, and within a few weeks, students across the state sat down at computers to answer 20 questions. Then summer break started and everyone pretty much forgot about the survey. Fall came around, the kids went back to class, and that's when the problems began. South Carolina didn't just want to measure student engagement. It wanted a way to rank its schools based on those measurements. The top line of this survey says there are no right or wrong answers, but that wasn't entirely true. Schools were rewarded or penalized depending on what their kids said.
When all of those schools then become ranked, it becomes a competitive model.
Schools got ratings ranging from excellent to unsatisfactory on their annual report cards, and not for student engagement, for school quality.
Some of our higher performing schools ended up with surveys that were below average to unsatisfactory.
This was the round hole the survey was never designed to fit into. Districts were furious.
We absolutely had zero positive input.
Some tried to figure out how the survey worked so they could improve their schools, but it was designed and administered by a company hired by the state. A lot of district leaders say they ran into roadblocks in getting the information they were looking for, like Georgetown.
Overall, we haven't found that data to be meaningful.
What does a good measure, a good outcome on the survey mean? That's what schools want better clarity on.
They also want clarity on the meaning behind some of the questions. Like number 17.
From a third grade perspective, from an 8-year-old's perspective, we hope they enjoy coming to school to see their friends.
36% of Horry County elementary students said just that. Another 33% said recess. The third most popular response was the one educators believe is most helpful for their schools. I like using technology. A bigger percent of nearby Williamsburg County's elementary schools were rated above average, where far more students picked that answer. And that was an overall pattern for this survey. Schools in poorer communities tended to score higher than those in wealthy ones. Educators are still trying to figure out why.
We would be jumping the gun if we were to presume that there is some kind of an association just because that's what we saw with one-year administration.
The problems grew from there. This was a competitive model, after all, which meant the top percent of schools were rated excellent, the next good, and so on. At least, that was the idea. Officials say dozens of schools never completed the survey and were removed from that calculation.
When all of a sudden you remove all of those that didn't participate, then all you've done is you've collapsed your distribution.
61% of students at Waccamaw Elementary in Conway, 65% of students at Myrtle Beach Intermediate, and 68% of students at Ocean Drive Elementary were rated as highly engaged by this survey. Yet Waccamaw's school quality was unsatisfactory, Myrtle Beach, average, and Ocean Drive, good. That's a 7% difference between the bottom tier and one of the best.
There's not much difference between a lot of these schools, but yet the rating just 0.1% or 1/10 of a point off, you may have dropped a rating or you may have gone up a rating.
If more than 50% of your students are actively committed, engaged in what's going on in your school, that's not a terrible number to have. That would 50%, 58% would be a good number in most cases.
The state will keep the same cutoff scores next year in hopes that schools work to improve their ratings. But officials are worried about something else now that teachers have access to the list of questions.
I had principals come up to me and say, let me tell you how I'm going to game this system going forward. I'm going to train my teachers and how to help my students take that survey. That defeats the whole purpose of having the engagement survey.
Educators say this survey only accounts for 10% of a school's overall rating, but every group involved in making decisions about the education system admits this 10% is flawed.
This is a starting point. We have to start somewhere. And so we finally settled on that place, we knew that we would have to make adjustments.
Several are already happening. More is being done to make sure all schools complete the survey. And in the past few weeks, the school quality section of the report card was renamed to student engagement. It shifts the state closer to fitting the peg this survey provides. But they almost went further.
I think I've been outmaneuvered.
Education leaders tried to push bigger reforms in February, but they were shut down by the State Education Oversight Committee. Everyone we talked to was in favor of change, but they can't agree on how to do it.
There are a lot of chefs stirring the pot. There's no question about that, which makes solving the problem difficult because every group they're looking at that evaluation tool and says, how's it going to affect me?
A spokesperson with the company behind the survey says it's been proven by research. But again, it was a square peg being used for something it wasn't designed to do. Many educators want to see school quality measured somehow, but not this way.
The amount of money our state's spending, it seems like we could do better.
So why technology?
Well, I like technology. I like tinkering with things and seeing how they work.
A principal can use information like that to improve their school. It was the people running the state education system who decided to make this survey competitive. The system, leaders admit, will never be completely fixed.
It's impossible to build a testing instrument that's going to make everyone completely happy. But we can work to get it as close as we can.
We should always strive to hold people accountable, but you can't hold them to a standard when the right tools aren't in place. Square peg, round hole. You learn that life lesson early on to shape decisions, and in this case, by teacher standards, those in charge appear to have failed. For ABC 15 Investigates, I'm Nick Papantonis, reporting.